Welcome to Question Mark, the podcast, exploring the greatest story ever told with open minds and open hearts.
We light it up, we won't come down, and the sun can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show, where it's covered in all the colored lights, and the runaways are on in the night. Impossible comes true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show.
Well, welcome everybody yet again to Question Mark, the podcast. I'm delighted today to be introducing to you in a minute a very special guest. But just to give you a little bit of a background to the podcast, if you've never listened to it before, this is an exploration of the Gospel of Mark. It's the greatest story ever told, and I can say that confidently because I think that's what Mark himself implies very strongly in the opening verse of this Gospel. It's the most important story ever told, and it's wonderful to be able to look at it in some depth over these series of podcasts. And if you love listening to this and you'd like to listen to more, do please follow or subscribe, and do tell your friends. And don't forget, leave a comment as well. We'd love to hear from you. So without further ado, on to this episode. And I'm absolutely thrilled that a good friend of mine, Mark Whitmore, has joined me today. Now, Mark is a very, very talented guy. I'm not just saying that because he happens to be in the same Zoom chamber as me. It's true. And rather than me trying to describe who he is and what he does, I'd love it if I could ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself. And also how you know me, because I think that would be quite interesting for the listeners to listen to.
Very good. Well, this is the worst part of the podcast for me, talking about myself. But I have had a career in Hollywood, basically, my whole adult life. I've been a manager and managed a lot of well-known celebrities and music people, actors, authors, all sorts of people in the entertainment world. So that's been my world. I know that many of the people that you've had on the podcast previously are preachers, Bible study leaders, scholars. I'm not that. So today you're going to get a little bit different perspective from a guy who really is just a guy. I'm just a guy in the entertainment business. That's how I make my living, and work in TV and film, stage and music, all those areas, books. So my perspective is going to be just as a guy. I've been a believer my whole adult life. So I'm not a pagan necessarily, but I am certainly, I circulate in a pagan world. That's kind of the world I circulate in Hollywood, and then in London when I'm there, and I'm there, every month, except if we have a pandemic or something. Sometimes I put a pause on being in London, but otherwise I'm in London every month, and I work there, and I work in Los Angeles. So that's a little bit about me. We have a mutual friend, Steph, a mutual friend, a guy named Mark Markowitz, who introduced us, and he said, I wonder if you'd meet with a friend of mine. He's an actor who's doing a stage version of Gospel of Mark. And of course, I say yes to just about every meeting anybody asked me to take. So I wasn't really thinking much about it until we got to the day of the meeting, and I started thinking about the Gospel of Mark. And I started thinking about doing it as a stage play. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? And I think I may have looked up a YouTube video of you performing, and I thought, this is really quite compelling. And so we met, you and I met. I think you came up to Victoria Station, and we met at the Grosvenor House in just outside Victoria, and had a tea and had a really nice, quite long conversation, I think. And I was a little intrigued by this idea of presenting the Gospel of Mark on stage, and was really happy to be able to assist with some advice and some other things, because I love stage, I love theater, but especially the Gospel of Mark, and especially the fact that everything that's on stage is 100% true.
Yeah.
Everything in this play is 100% true. And you can't say that about every play. That a lot of times it's opinion, or it's a thought, or it's a certain way of looking at things. But the Gospel of Mark is inspired by God and written down by men, but a factual account of Jesus' life. And I thought, what could be a more interesting stage play than that? So that's how our relationship started. I got sort of pulled in. I got intrigued by it, and then, of course, enjoyed the friendship with you, Steph. And as we've met many times over the years now, we've developed a friendship, I think, between the two of us.
Yeah.
So it's not just a work project for me. It's certainly a passion project for me as well.
It's so cool to hear that. And Mark, thank you so much. I have to tell the listeners, trying to spare Mark's blushes, that I do owe an awful lot to this man. I still feel quite green in what I'm doing, learning the trade, as it were. And here is a gentleman who has many years experience, scores of years of experience in the theatrical world, and yet is a devout believer and someone who's personally believes in the project I Am Mark, in a way that gives me great confidence and a sense of gratitude, really. And it's really good to be working with you, Mark. And I'm very grateful for all that advice that you've given me, both in terms of being an actor and working in the professional sense, but also in the way in which you've occasionally directed me. I remember having a great session in Southampton once when you just said, "What about the chair?" And you thought, actually, you could make much more of the chair than you do. And that was the start of a journey. I think the chair is a more talented actor. If I would be honest, he's certainly got a lot more character.
At least the pay is right, and the actor will never talk back. So that, in some ways, it's a very dependable actor. Yes,
Absolutely. He's not cracked under the pressure yet, literally. But even in our first meeting, I remember very clearly how you said, you could do this with a degree of nuance. And even in the Grosvenor House in Victoria, you started showing me how a narrator like Mark might have delivered this with a sense of, I'm recalling a deeply felt experience, a memory, if you like, which made it come alive for me.
Yeah.
It's not a recitation; it's an anecdote.
Yes. Absolutely. And Steph, you think about the book of Mark, it's sort of unique amongst the Gospels in a way. It was sort of written as if they thought, in a couple of thousand years, a guy from Southampton is going to want to put this on stage. We need to make this dramatic. It's written in such a way that it really is a narrative of Jesus' life. Unlike the other Gospels, Mark doesn't get into a lot of the detail of his early life and his birth and his genealogy and all those things. This is really just the dramatic story of Jesus' ministry on earth. So it makes it very appropriate for a stage production and for a stage telling, and very compelling to listen to, I think, because we're listening to a story and you're telling it maybe like it was told in the early church. And I think scholars believe that Mark's gospel was the first gospel written. I believe that's correct. By the way, I want to put a little asterisk by everything that I say. As I said, I'm an entertainment manager. I'm a manager in the entertainment business, not a Bible teacher or a pastor. So if I get something wrong on here, it's not on purpose. So people may want to double check every single thing I say today, just to make sure I don't mess it up too badly. But I think Mark was the first gospel, and as such, it was the letter that was being taken around to the early groups of believers around that part of the country and was read aloud. And I can just imagine that the reader would get excited when he was talking about the miracles and what Jesus said and it must have come alive for that early church. It must have.
Yeah.
It must have been thrilling for them to hear these stories from essentially from a firsthand experience, told from secondhand actually, but told by a firsthand observer, and written down by a secondhand person, of course. But nevertheless, I think that audiences today watching this on stage probably get some of that same kind of thrill, to relive it, to hear it in a new way. I mean, it's one thing to read something on the page and to be distracted and the television's on and the dog's barking and the doorbell rings and all that sort of thing. It's another thing to be in a quiet room with nothing else going on. Lights are down except for the one on the stage, and hearing a compelling story of the life of Christ. There's no more fascinating life that's ever lived in the history of mankind. And so to see this on stage, I think is a wonderful thing. And I think you do it very well. But I also think that the writer of the book of Mark did a very good job of giving us the kinds of details that make Jesus become more human to us, but also more divine.
Yes, that's a very powerful summary. I agree. Just picking up on your description there of what it must have been like, I think it must have been, it must have been the play, if you like. It must have been the narrator that captured the imagination, but also the sense that you're listening to a profound story in a group of people. You know, you're not there by yourself like you were watching TV. The energy in that audience must have been profound.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. It's kind of exciting to think about.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
But we better, talking about Jesus and in the way you just picked up on the fact that he's human, but he's also, there's this strong sense of his divinity in Mark. We have today to look at a particular passage, haven't we, from the story, and it's Mark chapter 2, verses 18 to 22. And the title of this episode is called Jesus Questioned About Fasting. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you will see an actual extract from the film I Am Mark, courtesy of CMAX TV. But if you're listening, you'll be hearing my good friend Lucy Warner, who, as always, has kindly deigned to read the passage for us. So without further ado, let's listen to the passage.
Now, John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and some people came and asked Jesus, "How is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not?" Jesus answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? They cannot, so long as they have him with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and on that day they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. Otherwise, the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins."
So there it is, Mark. That's the passage. Well, in just listening to that again, any general thoughts that spring to mind that you'd like to raise before we tackle the nitty-gritty?
You know, I'm struck by the fact that Jesus today in 2021, 2022, whenever people are going to be listening to this, we think of Jesus and we think of Christianity, but we think of Jesus as an authority figure. We think of him as he's He's traditional. He's part of the establishment. But in these days, in this passage, we see that Jesus was a contrarian in a way. John Stott wrote a book, I think in 1970. It was based on some sermons that he'd been doing since 1963, I think. Christ the Controversialist. And Jesus was controversial. He was not part of the establishment. He was on the outside. And many of us feel like we're on the outside. We feel like we're not part of the establishment. We're not part of tradition. Jesus is a perfect fit for people like that.
Yes.
Because Jesus himself was controversial. So I think you had just studied previously to this passage. The Pharisees were already questioning Jesus because of Levi, of his relationship with Levi Matthew. And I'm sure you discussed in that podcast that Levi was a tax collector. He was shunned by society. I mean, the Jews hated him because, in fact, I think he probably was disqualified from coming to the temple or to the synagogue anymore because of his position as a tax collector for the Roman government. And he was just shunned. But that's who Jesus went to. He went to the people outside the system. And I think, you and I have talked about this before, but the Pharisees Jesus just got under their skin. Everything they liked about tradition, Jesus was against. And the Pharisees, I think 5 times in the book of Mark, we see that Jesus was coming against the Pharisees and their traditions, and he was doing things differently, and it really bothered them. Yeah. Because they had control over the people, and these are the laws, and these you must follow, and these are the things you must do right to get close to God. And they had a very strict set of rules. Well, first thing we see in the Gospel of Mark, I'm sure you do it in your stage performance, but we saw that Jesus healed the paralytic that was let down from the roof, and Jesus healed him. And then he took on Levi, the tax collector, and had dinner with him and other outcasts from society. That's who Jesus hung out with. And then in this portion of scripture, we see now that the Pharisees, who loved to fast and fasted twice a week, every week, they always fasted, and John's disciples as well. Some scholars say that John's disciples were fasting because John was in prison. So they were mourning, they were worried, they were fasting and praying for God to deliver John from prison. But the Pharisees, of course, fasted twice a week, every week, just to show how religious they were. Yeah. The Bible, of course, or the scriptures never commanded anybody to fast twice a week. And that was something they're commanded to fast during Yom Kippur, once a year. That's the only commanded fast for the Jewish people. But the Pharisees thought, well, if one fast a year is good, twice a week must be super good. We must be super spiritual if we fast twice a week. So that was the attitude of the Pharisees coming in. This is some action that we can do that will just show God how religious we are. And Jesus and his disciples, of course, are not fasting. Yeah. And Jesus has something pretty interesting to say to them. Yeah. He says, when the bridegroom is with you, you can't fast. There'll come a time when the bridegroom will go away, and then you can fast. Yeah. But when the bridegroom's with you, you don't fast. And that sounds like just a little thing to say, but it was actually Jewish tradition. And the Pharisees knew this very, very well. In fact, there was an old document. I can't remember what the name of it was. I think I've written it down here. It was it was a Jewish document called the Megalat Anit, and it basically said it forbid fasting on joyous occasions.
Right.
And so when Jesus said, you can't fast when the bridegroom's with you, what he was basically saying is when you're having a wedding party, you're forbidden to fast. You can't fast during that time. And I'm the bridegroom and I'm here and we're currently having a wedding party. Now, at some point, the bridegroom is going to go away and then you can fast. But
so just to double check, you're saying that he's using the situation which the Pharisees have objected to as a teaching aid now. He's actually using that and saying, this is what I'm really about. And it's different to what you think being religious is all about. It's something along those lines.
Absolutely. And he's also using their own laws, their own rabbinic law, that you're not allowed to fast on a joyous occasion. It's against rabbinic law.
I didn't realize that. That's really interesting. I mean, when I read this passage, I thought, when you wouldn't normally fast at a wedding anyway. Someone's taken, a lot of time and trouble to prepare this absolutely gorgeous food.
Yes.
And a lot of money has been spent and you've been invited. You don't just sit there and look at it, do you? You absolutely have to, in fact, you go to the other extreme sometimes and enjoy a real feast.
Absolutely. In those days, in Jesus' days, and we saw it actually in other gospels when Jesus turned the water into wine, and we've seen it, that sort of thing. It was a religious. It was a feast. It was a time of rejoicing. And we think of a wedding. I'm going to a wedding on Saturday, and it'll be a one-day affair. It'll be a wedding, and then there'll be a dinner after, and it'll be very nice. But it's one day. But in Jesus' day, they were 7 days.
Wow.
They had a wedding, and for 7 days you ate and you drank and you had wine and you rejoiced in this wedding. And the rabbinic law said you're not to fast during those times. You're not to come in and say, well, I appreciate all this great food and wine, but I'm fasting. I can't partake. It just would put a downer on the celebration.
Can you clarify then a little bit more then? This is fascinating because he's basically turned the situation completely around and saying this is a completely different occasion right now. And he's also, from what you've told us so far, he's saying it involves me. It's about me. He's implying the bridegroom character.
Yes.
Parable, for I guess what it is himself. So why is he describing himself in that way? And why is he describing himself as a bridegroom at a wedding? What is that to do with anything at all?
Well, this is the beginning, of course, of in the Old Testament, the Messiah was never referred to as the bridegroom, but in the New Testament, often Jesus is referred to as the bridegroom, and the church or the believers are the bride.
Yeah.
Well, this is the beginning of that relationship. At this point, Jesus has now called a number of disciples. He's going to get into more when we get into chapter 3. But at this point in time, Jesus has started to call disciples, and they're gathered around him. And so he's starting this relationship between the bridegroom and the bride. And this is, while he's there with them, they're to celebrate that fact that they're in the presence of the bridegroom. They're in the presence of God. And this is not a time to be sad. This is a time to be joyful. God has come. The bridegroom has come. He's here with you. And so this is the world that we find ourselves in. He's trying to get the Pharisees to see it, but more importantly, I think he wants everyone else to see it. I think he wants his followers to see this is a time of celebration. While I'm here with you, it's something to celebrate.
Yeah. I love what you're saying here. It's about the sense of Jesus starting something completely new. And it's the church that's being described here.
Yes.
If we think about it, that's a momentous thing that he's suggesting is starting here.
Yes.
But I have to, if I'm honest, I have to take issue with you slightly, because you said about the bridegroom not being mentioned in the Old Testament. I don't know if this is true, because honestly I haven't looked it up, but I remember reading that there is some reference to the bridegroom in the Old Testament, and connecting with the Messiah. Not to do with the church, although I'm not disputing what you're saying, because I think it's absolutely right, but to do with Israel. So there's some idea about the Messiah as bridegroom coming to restore relationship between God and Israel, which had broken down, basically. Israel had been unfaithful. The bride had been unfaithful.
Yes.
But God was coming through the Messiah in the form of the Messiah.
Right.
In the person of the Messiah.
Certainly he talks about the children of Israel being an unfaithful bride. He did talk about that. I think it was in the book of Nehemiah. As I said, you've had great Bible scholars on here. I've listened to some of your podcasts. Great Bible scholars. I'm just an entertainment guy sitting out here in Los Angeles at 6 a.m. What do I know? So your listeners should look up anything I say and make sure that it's true. But but I think you make it interesting.
I think from the Pharisees' point of view, they're probably not thinking, oh, Jesus is starting a church. What they're thinking, but what he's trying to teach them is, no, this is actually a fulfillment of your scriptures. Listen, this is something really powerful that's happening in fulfillment of the promise of God.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, if I could just get really personal for a second, one of the things I love about Jesus and his life was that he did everything opposite of how we would have done it. If you and I had been putting a religion together, we would have done it a certain way. Jesus did it exactly opposite. So the Pharisees had put a religion together. They had sort of made something into their own religion. Jesus was doing everything exactly opposite. I've heard people refer to it as the upside down kingdom, because Jesus did everything upside down. If you were going to bring a Messiah into the world, you would make him a king. He would be a prince born in a palace. When Jesus came, he was a baby born in a manger, not even a house, a manger. If you wanted to have power, you would defeat your enemies. You might kill them. You might bring them into submission. Jesus gave up his life. He surrendered. He gave up life so that we could have life. And to me, it's the most interesting thing. Every time I think, well, the way I would do it would be this, and you look at the way Jesus did it, and it was almost always the opposite. The Jews were very big on revenge, but Jesus said, someone asks for your cloak, give it to them. If they ask you to walk 1 mile, walk 2 miles. In other words, Jesus brought about a new way. He was not looking at the old way. He was coming about in a brand new way, in a way you and I, Steph, if we're honest, you and I would never, ever conceived a way that was so different, so upside down, so anti, just against our instincts, anti-instinctual. We just wouldn't think of doing things the way Jesus did them.
No, that's right.
The disciples even, and you'll probably talk about this later on in the book of Mark as well, but all the rabbis at this time were considered teachers, and people who wanted to study more would apply to become a rabbi, a student of the rabbi, make application as if they were making application for university. But with Jesus called them. He said, I'm calling you, Levi, I'm calling you. You're not applying to be one of my students. I'm calling you out. And today, he calls each one of us, calling us. And it's just the different way that Jesus went about doing everything. So it's not a surprise to me that he was a little bit of a thorn in the flesh of the Pharisees, because he was doing everything opposite to what they had been teaching.
I love the way you say, I want to be personal about this, because in explaining what you've just said, you've mentioned several times, this is not the way you and I would have chosen to start a religion.
Yeah.
And it's almost like Jesus is being deliberately countercultural. But it just shows how easy it is for us to miss the point. I mean, we could sit here and spout all we like about what we think God means, what he wants to do, etc. But so often, I think our human mentality and our instinct, as you put it, gets in the way of really truly understanding. And here God comes along, as it were, and shows the truth. It's so different to how we would expect it to be the case. And the Jews were no different in those days. They expected the Messiah to be a certain person, like a king, as you say.
Yes.
And he's completely the opposite. He's the most humble human being ever, who dies the most inglorious death.
Yes.
It's just so different. And I think we ourselves, we've got to be careful about how we see and speak about these matters, haven't we? Because we can get it so badly wrong.
Yes. Oh, no, that's a very good point, Steph. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And as you were talking, I was thinking, really, the world has the wrong impression of Jesus. Yeah. They see Jesus, they see a statue up on the top of a church or somewhere, and they think of Jesus as being this establishment figure, but really, he came to be the most loving, gentle, in a way controversial, but he needed to be controversial. He needed to mix things up. He needed to shake up the traditions that Judaism had become about traditions. And if you didn't follow the traditions exactly, you weren't a good person. And we get into this now in the next section, when Jesus says, you don't sew a new piece of cloth on an old garment, because when you do, it will rip.
Yeah.
And you don't pour new wine into an old wineskin, because it will burst.
Yeah.
You can't just take this old religion that you guys have developed over a few thousand years and slap something new on it. It's a new thing. It's a brand new thing.
What he's got, what he's doing, what he's saying is a new thing. Is that what
Yeah, exactly. What Jesus was ushering into the world was something brand new.
Yeah.
It wasn't putting a Band-Aid on an old garment, or pouring new wine into their old wineskins. I'll bring you some new wine to pour into your traditions. It was a brand new thing. It was something so new that it couldn't be contained by the old.
Yeah.
I wrote down a few things that I was thinking about. So if you'll forgive me, as Jesus talks about the patch on the garment and the wine in the wineskin. Basically, I want to say that I think what Jesus is saying here in this next couple of verses is he's saying there's no compatibility between what you've been doing and what I'm ushering in. Yeah. It's not like I've come to fix the old system.
Yeah.
I haven't come to fix the old system. I've come to abolish the old system and to bring you a new way to reach a relationship with God.
Yeah.
The old covenant was about man's way to reach God through the sacrifice of animals. Yeah. That was the Jewish tradition. They could reach God if they sacrificed an animal once a year in the temple, and that would cover their sins. The new covenant is about God's way to reach man through the sacrifice of a savior, of Jesus, of himself. That was the new way. So that's the new wine. The old covenant was centered on man's faithfulness to God. How faithful can we be to God? The new covenant talks about, it shows us God's faithfulness to us through the gift of his son, Jesus. Every other religion, Steph, in the world, every other major religion in the world is some teacher, some good teacher, showing what we have to do to get to God. Christianity, this new thing that Jesus is bringing, was showing what God has done to get to us. God has come down to us. And I think that's such an amazing thing. This is a very profound thing that Jesus is saying. I'm not here to patch up the old system. I'm not here to show you how you can get closer to God. I am God, come to get close to you. And I think this is just profound.
It's amazing. I think what you're bringing to the podcast is this, I don't know, kind of a bird's eye view of the significance of Jesus, Mark. You know, we're not just looking at the precise time that this event happened. What we're seeing is a much wider, universal meaning.
Yes.
And how, you know, Jesus is so distinct, as you put it.
Yes.
From anything that's ever happened before and ever since.
Absolutely.
Understanding who God is and coming to relationship with him. And,
absolutely.
You know, that's so helpful. But yeah, for me also, I'm kind of, my own mind goes back to the Pharisees, the poor old Pharisees. I do feel a certain sympathy for them. I don't know about you. I think that in this book they're given a bit of a bad press, but if you think about it from the point of view of being as generous as you can be towards them, that some of them must have sincerely believed in the traditions that Jesus is saying, no, actually, this is not, you know, from now on, this is not the route. I guess where I'm going with this is to think about them and thinking about, Jesus is saying basically, I don't think this, you know, if I simply added my teaching to what you do already, it wouldn't work. The two things, they would clash. The thing I'm bringing is so new, it's so wonderful, it's so brand new, it's something completely different, that if I try to mesh the two things together, it would be a disaster. So I'm basically saying the same thing as you, but I think what I'm bringing to this as well is the sense that, yeah, Jesus is, I don't know, it's like, this is exciting. This is explosive almost, what he's doing.
Yeah, it really is. And I think to bring this down to our personal lives, for each person listening, for you and I, often we think, what do I have to do to be a good Christian? Or what do I have to do to have a great relationship with God? How can I measure up? I've known people who turned away from the church because they felt they just couldn't measure up.
Yeah.
But Jesus is saying here, this is not about your performance. Yeah. It's not about what you personally do. That is not what brings you your salvation. What brings your salvation is what I'm coming to do for you.
Yeah.
And that's true of every listener. It's true for me. Yeah. It's true for you. And this was the difference. The old wineskin is a performance-based religion.
Yeah.
The new wineskin is a grace-based relationship
Yeah.
between us and God.
Yeah. No, I get you. That's very, very powerfully and persuasively put. I think what I was reaching for earlier, though, was this sense that structure is an issue.
Yeah.
Wineskins are an issue. Clothes are an issue. Do you think maybe part of the Pharisees' problem here is that they've built this structure, a religion, if you like, that Jesus, the life that Jesus was bringing, kind of didn't kind of relate to. And I wonder whether we could take that further in terms of church. Sometimes we can build structures and religion and laws and rituals which have little to do with the life that Jesus is bringing. Is that something you feel as well?
Oh, absolutely. No, I think you make a very good point, Steph. You know, we as human beings, we like having something we can control.
Yeah.
And the Pharisees loved having something they could control. They had 64 different books that they had written about all the rules and regulations of being a good Jew.
Yeah.
And Jesus said, there's nothing about this you can control. This is a brand new thing. But I think it is our natural tendency as humans to want to say, well, if you do this, you're a good Christian. If you do that, you're a bad Christian. And frankly, realistically, there are certain things that we should want to do if we're followers of Jesus. We should want to do certain things. But we don't live a performance-based religion. It's not what we do, it's what he did. And so I can be sympathetic as you are with those Pharisees, because it is natural to want to control the situation. Here are the list of rules. There's one rule, and the rule is that we put our complete faith and trust in Jesus Christ, and that is what brings us into relationship with God. That's it. It's not a list of rules.
If we were to do that, if there were some listeners here today listening to us who've not done that, what would happen if they did that in your understanding, in your experience?
Well, when we invite Jesus in, he comes in to live, and he doesn't come in to just patch up our old lives. Someone may say, well, I'm not happy with this about my life, or I'm not happy about my actions, or maybe I'm an alcoholic, or maybe I've got marital issues, or maybe I've got problems with my kids, or maybe I'm ill and I'm looking for something that will heal me and make my body better. Jesus doesn't come in to just patch up the old me. Just like he didn't come in to patch up the old religion, the old Jewish religion. He comes in to create a new me. When he comes into our lives, we don't have to worry about so much about the things we're going to quit doing. We're going to stop this, we're going to stop this. Those things will come along, because the more Jesus comes in and becomes in our lives, and the Holy Spirit comes in and takes residence in our lives, those old things start to just pass away. We don't want them anymore. We don't need them anymore. That's not to say we're not without sin. Certainly we are. Well, certainly I am. I'll just speak for myself. But Jesus comes in to live in us. He doesn't come to just, as I think C.S. Lewis used an illustration one time that I kind of love. We think when we invite Jesus into our lives, it's like inviting someone into our house to fix it up a little bit. Can you fix up our house a little bit? Maybe replaster that wall, or maybe add a room on over here. All of a sudden we find he's not trying to patch up the old house. He's not trying to fix the cracks in the ceiling. And sometimes it's painful. He's building a mansion for himself to live in. And that's what he's making out of us. He's making something brand new for us personally.
So it's not a system of rules that we follow. Christianity is not about that. It's about
No.
a life that's being lived in us and growing in us organically,
Yes,
almost.
absolutely. And it's allowing Christ to live in us.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
It's so exciting, Mark. I've noticed time and time again when I've done the podcast, it feels like God, if I could be so bold, is reaching out to people through some of the words that come up in a conversation like this, that he is available and he's really desires to have that relationship that you've described, which you and I both have experienced, I think, that
Yes.
changed our life around, like Jesus changed the life around of these guys here in first century Palestine.
It's amazing. And much of it is without even trying.
Yeah.
People talk about how hard the Christian life must be, and it is in some ways, I suppose, but seriously, Jesus is working on us in ways we don't even recognize.
Yeah.
We're not even trying. I find myself doing things that a few years ago I wouldn't even have dreamt of, because God has done this work in my heart. And, resentment, anger, fear, things that used to be present in my younger life are no longer there. And it wasn't like I said, I've got to drive out fear, I've got to drive out anger. But as God does his work in our lives, these things are happening. And it's supernatural. It can't be explained. I mean, until you experience it, you don't understand. You think, well, I've got to do all this work. No, we just have, the work we have to do is to say, Jesus, I believe in you. I believe that you are the Messiah. I believe you are the bridegroom. I believe that you have come to change the world and you've come to change me. And when we accept that, well, all kinds of wonderful changes start to take place.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I just want to build, I think, on what you've just said about changing the world and changing me. The two things, they go together, don't they? Each individual is important. And in terms of the global community. But there is this global sense too, isn't there? Even in this story, the bridegroom has come and he's sitting around a table with outcasts and the most disreputable people in society. And he's saying to them, welcome. And there's a celebration going on. It's a feast. It's a place, if we are at a wedding and it doesn't always happen, but I guess most people would like the weddings that we go to be full of joy, good humor,
yes,
full of love, romance, not just a couple, but everybody united in a sense of celebration and togetherness. And I think what I think is coming through here is not just this individual change, but part of it is about God's desire for all of his creation, that sense of community,
yes,
of peace, of joy, of prosperity. This is his dream.
Yes,
for us, all of us.
Yes.
So I know some people can, and perhaps they've got a little bit of a point, if I'm honest, can criticize Christianity and say it's all about me, it's all about the individual, it's all about my relationship with God, etc. I don't think that's a slightly unfair portrayal, but I can see how they might say that. But I think the scriptures, what this scripture does in particular, is point to this much wider vision that God has for the world as a whole, for the universe. Clearly, it's not something that's happening now. If we look around, we can see aspects of it, but there are many things going wrong here in this world of ours, and in terms of disharmony, injustice, all sorts of horrible things that are happening. But God's vision is unrelenting, and that's what Christ came to bring. And it's happened in his day. It started happening. His death and resurrection continued that process, and it's going to happen when he comes again. There is that sense, and Christians believe, don't they, that God is going to make everything right. And that's what the wedding is all about. The wedding is where it's a day when everything is right, or 7 days when it's perfect.
Yes, indeed.
Wow. Mark, it's been an amazing adventure with you today. I felt my own sense of how fortunate I am to have been called in the way that you've described Jesus in this gospel to a new life. My own sense of that has been reawakened and underlined as something so precious. So I'm deeply grateful to you for bringing that alive in me. And I trust that for many who are listening, the same thing is happening, something very similar.
Indeed. Yes, indeed. Thank you for having me, Steph. It's been quite fun to discuss these things, and I think good for all of us to dig into these things. Yeah. And I apologize for my American accent. You may have to use subtitles or have a translator, but hopefully I can be basically understood.
No, I think you can. Yeah, and I think I should apologize for my English accent too. I love the way. I mean, who knows which is right? Is it fast or is it fast?
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. It's fast. Yeah.
Anyway,
so I'm going to go prepare the tomatoes, and
you enjoy that. And thanks again, Mark. And God bless. Speak to you soon.
God bless.
If you enjoyed this episode of Question Mark and don't want to miss any future episodes, make sure to click on the subscribe button. This also means other people can find the podcast and join the conversation. We'd also love if you could leave a review so we know what was good and what we can improve for future episodes. Join us and our special guest next time, where we'll continue to explore the greatest story ever told together. If you want to get involved with the podcast or have any questions or comments in the meantime, please do get in touch using the I Am Mark social media channels. We'd love to hear from you.
We light it up, we won't come down, and the sun can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. And this is the greatest show, where it's covered in all the colored lights, and the runaways are on in the night. Impossible comes true, it's taking over you. And this is the greatest show.